I'd been dealing with probably around about 6 years of incessant bullying, which became quite physical. All of that built up to create a bit of a pressure cooker situation.
Welcome to the BPD Bunch. I'm your host, Xannie, and today I am here with Katja, Georgette, Jack, and Jay. Where in the world is everyone coming from?
I'm joining from West Midlands, United Kingdom.
I'm coming from New Jersey in the United States.
I'm coming from Atlanta, Georgia, United States.
And I'm calling from Rio de Janeiro in Brazil.
And then I'm coming from New Mexico in the United States. Today we are going to be talking about BPD at school. If this or other BPD related topics interest you, please make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on your notifications so you do not miss anything. So let's just dive right in. How did BPD affect you as a student? Which BPD symptom caused you the most difficulty and why?
I didn't know that I had BPD until I was 34 years old. So obviously I didn't know that I had that diagnosis while I was still at school. But I definitely remember experiencing quite intense BPD symptoms right up until I was about 21. And that's when my schizotypal symptoms started and they just kind of like knocked BPD off the radar. But up until that point, I remember the ages of 15 to 17 being particularly difficult. So I was dealing with quite a lot of turmoil at the time. I was dealing with an eating disorder. I had an active court case that I was dealing with, not as a defendant, but I'd also been involved in an accident as well, which had left me needing almost 5 months off school. So it was just a very, very chaotic time. And in that period, that's when my BPD symptoms were definitely at their worst. I'd been dealing with probably around about 6 years of what I would say was incessant bullying, which became quite physical at times as well, and there was a lot of harassment which was involved, and all of that built up to create a bit of a pressure cooker situation. And what happened was, despite previously being an outstanding student, having a great academic record, being something of a model student, is that my behaviour began to change once I hit the ages of 15 to 17. And I found that I was truanting from school, so I just wouldn't go to lessons, I wouldn't be where I was supposed to be, I was with people that I wasn't supposed to be with, and my behaviour was very oppositional, quite unpredictable, I would say. And safeguarding in schools back then is not what it is now. So a lot of the things that I was doing were like slipping under the radar because no one was really paying attention to what was going on. Nobody was really asking questions. And a lot of it was dismissed as bad behaviour because up until that point, I'd very much treated the bullying as something that if I just ignored it, it was going to stop eventually. And as I've got older, I've realised actually like the opposite is probably true. And it culminated in a massive meltdown while I was in school, which was very public. It was not nice for me. It was not nice for the people around me to witness that emotional reaction. I've never been physically violent. There was no violence involved in that sense. But I think it was just a release for me, really, to get rid of all of that anger and that resentment that had built up over the years. And the result of that was the school basically suggested it might be best for me if I left.
I can totally relate to what you said about sort of flying under the radar a little bit. I was not as openly dysfunctional like in class or around teachers. I don't think I was all that oppositional with teachers on average, but I think the emotional instability of BPD really hit me early and hit me really hard. And so there were a couple of ways in which that manifested in problematic ways. The first one was that I got such anxiety around exams, because I always felt like I was going to be judged, and I was so sensitive to rejection that like not doing well on an exam always felt like a judgment of my character as a person. And so in middle school, high school, I started faking being sick out of the anxiety to get out of taking exams. I took them later and I did fine, but the anxiety was just overwhelming. Because nobody ever called me out on it, it ended up over the course of my life developing into, now if I'm anxious about a situation where I'm going to be judged, I physically feel sick automatically. I trained my body to kind of have this response, and people didn't pick up on the pattern when I was in high school, and except for my dad, but I was like, well, you're my dad, you don't know anything. You know. And then when I was in university, I was consumed by my emotions in a different way, where I was just obsessed with my favorite person relationship to the point that it drastically interfered with my ability to go to class. If there was something not going right in our relationship, that was the only thing I could think about. I could not get myself to go to class. And I remember this, I've washed out of university twice. The first time was because I had an eating disorder that consumed me, but the second time was because of this favorite person relationship. And it was just, whenever things didn't go well, all I could focus on was that relationship. And it was like a few weeks would go by where I hadn't gone to class. And then all of a sudden the semester was over and I'd failed all my classes because I just didn't go. So that was really how BPD affected me the most, I think, was just that emotional instability and the mood dependent behavior. It was like, however I felt was in complete control of what I was going to do that day, which made me very unreliable.
I'm similar. I didn't realize I had BPD until my adulthood, but I remember schooling was very difficult, especially for me. It started kind of young, because I remember just really one day, like elementary school, just one day waking up feeling extremely angry, just out the blue, and it continuing for the rest of my school career until I graduated high school. And I joke about it a lot, like, oh yeah, I was a little demon back then. Now I was a scary little monster. But yeah, it was constantly fighting all the time, constantly getting suspended, constantly doing things that concern my parents and people around me. Like, I had a open case as a defendant in high school. I dealt with a lot of bullying myself, which in the high school situation really just didn't help. Hell, in middle school, I had a couple incidents where I should have been arrested for things I did. School was not a fun place for me, and that's really where I sort a lot of my symptoms and a lot of my negative side was at school.
So I was also diagnosed later in life as an adult. So in thinking about me as a student in high school, it's your teenage years. I feel like with BPD and just being a teenager, a lot of the things can be similar, but with BPD, it's just a little more extreme. So I remember high school as being a time when I was like really trying to find my identity the way I think most teenagers do. But things just, I would take it like a little farther than it probably needed to go. At one point, I was almost sent to like the alternative high school because I kept misbehaving. And I see you, Jack. I mean, it wasn't so extreme that I was actually sent, but I remember like kind of my emotional instability. There was a teacher that I would like take it out on, and I would really act up in their class. And I just didn't like that person. I look back now and I'm like, oh my God, that poor teacher. I was so mean and nasty to her. So for a while there was that, where I was staying after school, smoking pot, just kind of trying to figure out who I was, but without really having that grounded sense of like self. So I was getting in trouble. Then I went out of the public high school for a while and did like a homeschooling thing where I worked. I did like, you can do packets of work. I did that and I had like a little job, and then I decided to go back to school. And when I went back to high school, I got elected to student government and I was like involved with all of that my senior year. I was a homecoming princess. And then I graduated towards the top of like the group of my class. So like I was achieving good grades. I was on student government. I was doing all this stuff. So it was like not just a little bit of acting out. It was like a lot of acting out. And then it wasn't just like, I'm going to go to school and do what I'm supposed to. It was like, I'm going to go to school and do what I'm supposed to and be, on the student government and doing this and doing that. So that my grades never really suffered too badly, which is the only thing my parents really paid attention to. So it was like, I've got all this stuff going on in the background, but like I was bringing home good enough grades to where they were like, whatever.
I got my BPD diagnosis during my master's degree, but at school, I think one of the ways that it affected me the most was really that my sense of self was like constantly fractured. I was severely bullied all the way through primary and secondary school. And when I was figuring out that I was gay, I came out as gay very, very, very young. I was like 11, 12 years old. So it was a huge error of judgment that I made. But I went to a Catholic school and my teachers put me in isolation when I spoke about that. It was like I was told that it was inappropriate to discuss. And, I was very young. I was not also a very combative student or argumentative or quote unquote difficult. So I didn't resist any of that. I actually felt like, I was doing something wrong. And that's quite damaging. I then had a lot of spirals of like suicidal ideation or self-injury, which I was also punished for by the school. Like I was categorized as somebody that needed, a risk assessment needed to be conducted about whether or not I could be there because these things were happening, even though they weren't happening at school and they were happening to me, but I was the one that wasn't being supported. Even if there were any conflicts with students, I would be removed and put in isolation, and it would be framed as though that was for my benefit, but I was the one being punished. Because isolation in the UK, I don't know if everywhere has this system, but essentially, like at my school at least, you would get put in a room and you'd face a wall for the entire day. You wouldn't see anyone. People would go and get your work, put it in front of you, you'd do it, it would go back to the teacher. Break times, you would stand outside of the principal's office against the wall. Like that is all you did. And I was in there when I came out as gay. I think I was in there for nearly a month. It's quite shocking, really, when I think back to it. It's like, that's illegal. But anyway, then when I did eventually get diagnosed during my master's degree, things changed a little bit, and it became more about, I was very sensitive to rejection. I was in a very competitive academic environment. I did my master's at the University of Toronto, so big name university, and I was under a lot of pressure. And any slight sense of judgment of my work or my ability, I took very hard. And when I started to get unwell, I started to feel very suicidal. I had a lot of issues for months and months and months, several crises going on simultaneously and on repeat for a really long period of time. The university sort of washed their hands with me. They pretty much just wanted me to get out because as an international student, I'd already paid the fees. So they didn't care whether I was there or not. And it felt like that to me. And I think that just in turn made it worse. Everything felt like a big indictment of my character. I couldn't struggle and it just be that I'm struggling in that moment. It's like, this person is a liability, is incapable of being here, incapable of doing the work that we need to the quality that we need. Therefore, we don't need them anymore. So, I think for a really long time, who I am has been very tied up in school or school environments, especially as an academic, which can be quite difficult when you have BPD because it sort of feels like everything is a huge indictment of who I am as a person. And when I was younger, I just wasn't really allowed to be. I wasn't allowed to be gay and figure out what I was. I was being told that this is wrong and this way of speaking about this is wrong and this way of feeling about this is wrong, just constantly on repeat. And like I said, I wasn't so combative to that. So I really took that in, and I think that did me a lot of damage in the long term. Even today, I can still see ways that comes up mentally for me regularly.
BPD is often characterized by unstable relationships. Did you ever have a time where your BPD was extremely disruptive in a relationship at school? If so, tell us the story.
I already kind of alluded to this, but I kind of had one teacher this was in high school, that I felt like, I just didn't like her, and she really bore the brunt of like taking out all of my frustration and angriness at that age on this like poor math teacher, because I hated math. And then in college, for my undergraduate degree, there was a teacher there. She was an English teacher who I just loved. So it wasn't like a negative thing. It was a good thing. And it wasn't an unstable relationship. It was like a more stable relationship. But I looked up to her. I feel like I put more into her classes because I liked her. So it's just more the relationships that I formed. Sometimes they were almost like a protective thing, like a way to inspire me to do better. But then others, it was like, because I didn't like math and because I didn't like this math teacher, I really didn't go very far in math because I was constantly kicked out of her class. And then with my friendships, I was friendly with everybody, but would have like one friend at a time where I like spent all my time with them. And if there was any sort of falling out, I had no idea how to repair that. So I would go from like, oh, I'm hanging out with this person like all the time, to then almost like overnight being like, oh, well, I guess we're not speaking anymore, and, I'm avoiding them. And I would have to, figure out like, well, who my next friend was going to be. And that can be hard to have these intense friendships, and then you lose it, and then you're forming one with another person, and it's just like over and over and over again. So your mind isn't like in school, your mind is on this other stuff that's going on in your life.
Yeah, school, I really didn't have many friends because I was always, like I said, I was always angry. My teachers, all these relationships were damaged because of the incidents I had in school. Before that, I was just a quiet nobody, but after the incidents I had, I became more scary to know, because I could blow up at any minute. The last incident, which was in high school, actually sent me to alternative school. After I got done with alternative school, went back to high school, I really just flew under the radar after that. Nobody remembers me. Nobody knows me like that. So having BPD and not knowing it really affected how I was received around everybody and how I perceived myself, really.
I had one teacher in particular who was my English literature teacher for the last 2 years of secondary school. And I had struggled so much all the way through school with feeling like completely misunderstood all the time, that nobody ever gave me a chance. My brother was less into school and a little more problematic than me at school, I think, his behavior, etc. And teachers just labeled me as the offshoot of him, essentially. So I often felt like people didn't really give me much of a chance. And she was the only teacher who never made me feel like I was too much, never made me feel like an idiot for asking something, gave me opportunities very willingly. With her, I took part in so many different things. I won like the regional version of a national poetry competition with her. She was the only person that supported me. And I think something that I guess I remember, in terms of how BPD played into that relationship. So I suppose I was a little needy. It was like the first time I was getting treated respectfully and like not like I'm some kind of monster, and I just latched. In fact, I still talk to her to this day, and I first started having classes with her when I was 14, so it's a really long time ago. I'm 26 now, so it gives a bit of an insight into how important that relationship was for me. And it was also important, I think, for my academic growth, because she could also critique me on my work, and it was like the only person that I didn't feel was sticking a knife in me and twisting it when she was doing that. because she was treating me respectfully, and it always came with like, well, this is what you do to be better, and this is all the things that you did that were great, and this is why this thing maybe just needs to change. And I think I ended up getting like an A in that class. So, you know, it really worked well for me. And a lot of my other relationships with teachers from that point onwards, even at the university level, were much better, I think, because of that experience that I'd had.
I think it's interesting that you've said that, Jay, because I have a very similar situation with a teacher that I was close to at school that I still maintain contact with, who was amazing. I was quite distrustful, I think, of a lot of my teachers because it wasn't exactly a secret that the bullying was going on. It started with a group of girls who were older than me, and then when it went unchallenged, it sort of spread throughout the whole school, so you sort of get it from all angles. But for her, she provided a bit of a refuge for me, and I remember the one day when it was really bad, she drove me home from school and dropped me off at my house because I was so scared about leaving the school gates. And I think it's things like that that really stick with you, like the kind things that people do for you. I mean, obviously now, like, you wouldn't ever be allowed to take a child home in your car, but at the time it was just something that was so compassionate. And I had a really hard time at school because when you are bullied to that extent, like, no one wants to know you, they don't want to associate with you whatsoever. So I kind of found my people in the other people that were the oddballs and the rejects that nobody else really wanted to know. So in one sense, my social life and my relationships with other people were almost non-existent, but it pushed me further towards people who were also outliers. And I think that, you know, those people are still my friends now. So in a weird way, it's actually done me a favour. Like, I understand and value friendship so much more now. Like, when people talk about BPD and how they lash out at people closest to them, I'm actually the opposite. Like, it's rare for me to lash out, but when I do, it's to people that I don't have an emotional connection with, because those people who are so close to me, I would not ever want to do anything to jeopardize those relationships on a whim. So I think it has actually helped me to keep perspective on those relationships.
I don't think I had any really epic conflicts with teachers. I kind of flew under the radar with them, I think because I was too afraid of getting in trouble. But I did have a lot of conflicts with other students. I think it's challenging, especially in a setting where you have a bunch of teenagers together. Like, everyone's trying to figure out who they are. No one has super mature emotion regulation or communication skills. And there was this one time when I was in high school, I was dating this guy, and he had been smoking weed for on and off, and had decided he didn't want to do it anymore. And one of his friends had tried to convince him for the two of them to smoke together. And I got so angry. This is one of the few times I've ever been physically violent. But I got so angry, when I found out about it, I ran up to the kid, grabbed his hand, I was running up to him, so he put his hands up like, oh, what's this girl? I grabbed his arm, pulled it out of the way, and then kicked him in the chest. And told him off for trying to peer pressure my boyfriend into smoking together. I'm very lucky. No teacher saw that. I never got in trouble for it. I probably should have, actually. It might have maybe been better. I don't know. But yeah, that's one example I can think of where my just sense of things have to be a certain way and my emotional conviction about it sort of drove me to this really extreme, very problematic, deeply not okay behavior. So what helped you manage BPD at school the most effectively? And if you did not manage BPD effectively at school, what would you do differently knowing what you know now?
I can start because it's short, because I didn't know to manage it, because I didn't know that I had it. However, I did. After diagnosis and while in treatment, I did try to go back to school. I went into a doctoral program And I found that the pressure of school at that particular time was taking a toll on my ability to go through treatment and learn to manage my BPD better. So it was a really, really hard choice, but I made the decision that it was not the right time for me to be in a graduate program. And there's been very few times in my life that I've quit something, but I found that in order to manage my BPD that I did have to take a step back from school. It just wasn't the right time, but I didn't shut the door on it completely. I know that there's always an opportunity to go back.
Yeah, I can really relate to that, the value of taking a step back. I mean, I didn't take a step back intentionally, but the first 2 times I tried to go to university, my emotional instability, really in particular, was just so overwhelming. I didn't have the skills to attend to an emotion and then continue going to class. And I also think that at the first 2 times I went to school, I was doing it because that's the thing you do after high school, not because I was really passionate or interested in doing something. It was just, you need a college education, so this is what you do. And not having a strong why, I think, compounded the fact that I didn't have these skills and there wasn't a strong reason for me to try to learn them. So then in my late 20s, when I knew I had BPD and I started going through that recovery process, I didn't know exactly the job I was going to have, but I knew what I cared about and what I wanted to learn about. And I was excited to learn. I went back, and I think also having some emotion regulation skills was really, really, really useful, because I've also really struggled with the all or nothing thinking. And, when I've not done well on an exam, I would think, oh, like maybe this isn't for me, or I just need to quit because I obviously can't do this. And so having some ability to sit with those negative emotions and find ways to do better really served me well. I ended up graduating in the top of my class in 2022. For me, I think DBT emotion regulation skills were really essential, because I would not have been able to go through those moments where things weren't going as well and actually been willing to stick it out, because the emotional intensity would have been too much for me.
Honestly, in terms of maybe the master's program, when I got my diagnosis, I didn't handle it. And I don't know if I think that there's anything that I would do differently, because it was just the beginning of the process and I was going through a lot of crises, and I just don't really, I don't think I should have been there, really. I don't think there is more to say about it than that. In an ideal world, maybe there would have been a bunch of skills that I could have leveraged, but I think too much was going on at that time in particular. So I've kind of made peace with that. But in terms of where I am now, I think I manage it quite well. The main issue for me in educational settings has always been the interpersonal side of things, not really school. I don't have issues with exams. I don't tend to struggle getting my work done. But interpersonally, I struggle quite a lot with my perception of how other people are perceiving me, whether they're colleagues or professors. I think how I manage it now that makes it successful is I'm much more blunt and clear about what I need and unapologetic about what I need. Before, I would have found it quite easy to bend to what a professor is making me feel like. But now I'm like, no, this isn't a problem. I just need this, and that is the way that it is. And one of the ways that I've handled it outside of that is, really listening to myself. Like if my body and mind are giving me a hell of a lot of indications that I've just had enough at that point in time, like there's something going on, I just listen. I don't punish myself for not reading that day or for not writing. If I need to stay in bed, I stay in bed. If I need to go out with somebody, I go out with somebody, because it just is what it is. And I find when I don't do that and I push myself, this goes on longer. I end up delaying longer, I cancel more things because it just keeps spiraling. So, learning to have that patience with myself, be more skillful interpersonally, and also respect my needs and meet my own needs has been very important.
One of the skills I used then, because I didn't know I was using a skill to help with my moods, is a skill I use today because I know it does. Is music. I was always the kid. I was always getting in trouble because I was always had my headphones on in class because I was listening to music to drown out not only the noise in the class but the noise inside my head. So that I didn't realize then what I was doing, but I do now, and I'm so glad that I discovered that as a kid that just put on your headphones and just zone out, zone everything else, and coast, and it still helps to this day.
On reflection, looking across all of my educational experiences, I would say I just wish I'd stood up for myself a little bit more and what I needed at a particular point in time, because especially looking back at my education in high school or secondary school, I really feel like the fact that I was obsessed with living up to my own high standards and being an overachiever meant that I just swept everything else aside. And I was like, as long as I'm doing well, that's all that matters. And I think we do have this rhetoric around education where it's that you have to pass exams to be successful, and to a degree that's true. But I just took it to such an extreme that I was like, actually, it doesn't really matter what my environment's like when I'm at school, as long as I'm doing well. And I think the people around me adopted that mindset as well, including the teachers. And really thinking about it, like when I look back on school now, I don't look back and think of fun memories or, like a teacher being really weird or really funny. I just think back to the negative, and that's such a massive shame to have that experience. So if I could go back and do it all again, I just wish that I would have been honest about what was going on to improve things for myself.
So what advice would you give to parents and teachers of students with BPD to help them be more successful?
The best advice that I could probably give is to be curious. So not judgmental, just curious, because one of the things that I find is most effective with the students that I work with is just showing an interest and asking questions. So as a teacher, we have something called professional curiosity, where we use questioning to try and find out what's going on in a student's life, how we can help them. And it's worth remembering that all behaviour is communication. Like when I look back at my behaviour when I was younger, yes, at times it was not good, but it always came from something else that was going on at the time. And if somebody had stopped and thought to ask me questions and to be curious about what was going on, that situation could have been resolved. And I feel like for parents and for teachers, it's so important to not just dismiss things and just show that curiosity and take an interest in the students that you have, because you never know what students are going to tell you. Like some of the biggest disclosures that I've had from students have come from just seemingly innocuous things and everyday conversations. And it's quite often an innocent question that has then sparked everything else. And I think creating those opportunities for people to share is so important.
Yeah, I would say similarly, to have that curiosity, because one of the things that I reflect on is both in high school and in university, I kind of felt like I got away with a lot of things that it was kind of problematic, and I don't think that they should have taken the other extreme and punished me or been like, you're a liar or whatever. But when I was faking being sick to get out of exams, that was a pattern that I would have benefited from somebody saying, hey, it seems like you don't feel well whenever there's an exam. Like, let's explore that. Like, what is going on for you when this happens, right? Or like when I was in university, I remember asking for an extension. It was right when COVID hit. I was asking for an extension on something because my transition to being at home all the time, I'm very extroverted. It took me a really long time to get used to being at home all the time. And I was having difficulty without that external accountability of being physically in the classroom to actually get stuff done. And so I reached out to one of my professors to ask for an extension. And he was very kind, but I think a little too lenient. He said, oh yes, this is a crazy time, just get it in whenever. Like there wasn't like a set, let's try for next week, right? He didn't give me a new deadline, which made it even harder for me. Like I really do better with concrete expectations. We can adjust those, but I can try to work towards something concrete. If someone just says whenever, I really struggle with that. And so I think having that curiosity of asking those questions and digging deeper and trying to find a balance between being kind and also trying to get people to exceed their own expectations of themselves. Because I think for me, so much of it was I would encounter some amount of difficulty and I lost all belief in myself. I would have really benefited from people saying, I think you can do better than this. Not in a punishing way, but just, I've seen your other work. I know that this is below what you can do, and I believe that you can do better than this.
The advice I could give to educators who might be dealing with somebody that seems to have like big emotional reactions or BPD traits is to remember just what Katja said, that all behavior is a form of communication. And looking back, like to my high school times, nobody really paid too much attention to the fact that somebody who had like always done well in school was starting to act out and do this and do that. And it was like if somebody had seen that as a form of communication, there could have been an intervention to help. And then just to the parents and to students, I'm a big advocate of education, and I think it's very important to get that. But I also am a big advocate of it's never too late. So like even with myself, I mentioned earlier, starting a program and realizing this just was not the right time. I had other things I needed to focus on. I feel like that's good to keep in mind. I took a year off between high school and college, and I took that time to I did my own thing. I worked a little bit. And by the time I went back to school, I was so happy to be there. So I think it can be scary to think that somebody is taking time away from school, but if the time away is needed and it helps bring you to a place of stability, like school is always there. You're never shutting a door.
The biggest piece of advice that I'd give to anyone: be more critical of what you think and how you're responding to people. I think sometimes it's not always that the other person is the problem, right? And sometimes it's just your own perceptions that are getting in the way of you responding appropriately to this other person that's going through something. Be open to that and be critical of that as a rule.
Thank you everyone so much for watching. We hope you got a nugget of wisdom to take with you on your journey. Friday we'll be back to talk about accommodations and getting reasonable adjustments in a school setting, as well as whether or not we choose to disclose our diagnosis at school. Next Wednesday we'll be back with a brand new topic. If you can't wait until then, you can check out an exclusive extended cut of next week's episode up right now on our Patreon, available for our top 2 tiers, our BPD buddies and our BPD besties. So go check it out. Link is down below, and we will see you next time.